adiposity, and this may be related to a better fluid control during Ramadan, okay, as indicated by improvement in IDWG. And interestingly, in Saudi patient, we did not see any changes in anthropometric profile, except the fact that we saw some increment in the triceps skin fold. Okay, and in Saudi patient, they eat a lot more during Ramadan as opposed to Malaysian patient, right? And it's quite interesting. We can see some improvement in hand grip dynamometer, hand grip strength, which is correlate with their muscle mass, and of course improvement in phosphate level in terms of diet as well as in terms of their blood profile. All right, and we see some marginal changes in the lipid profile. So as a conclusion, patients who fasted during Ramadan may experience temporary nutritional changes. However, they revert back to their original or baseline level after 1 or 2 months post-Ramadan. This has been shown in our study. So what makes these two countries different in terms of these parameters? So that could be because of the socio-cultural, because of the food practice difference, and so on and so forth, right? And I think Dr. Khoshla asked me a very valid question. So if we actually, is there any such a cumulative effect? Meaning that if this patient experiencing weight loss, year after year, is there any some cumulative effect, which is at this point, this is hypothetical and we don't know about it. And of course, when we want to make some advice, we have to account for the variation in some of the studies. That's why we see differences between all of these studies. In terms of the climate and so on and so forth. And we suggest that if patient asks you about Ramadan fasting, you do some comprehensive nutritional evaluation about them, and if they already are experiencing PEW, it is not advisable for them to fast, right? So we have published in Journal Renal Nutrition and also Nutrients recently about this study, and I would like to thanks to my master student, Nur Iman Hafiza, and the rest of them, some nephrologists from various institutions for the Ramadan study in Malaysia, and also for the Ramadan study in Saudi Arabia. I would like to thank Bayan and also Dr. Pramod Khoshla and all team that involved in this study. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your really interesting and informative paper, and it is very much relevant to our country because Bangladesh is a country where a majority of our population is a Muslim. So culturally, it would help us a lot, especially the researcher. Now, sir, can I announce that the floor is open for discussion for any question? And I would like to...
Sorry, Chairperson, we've got one more lecture.
Paper is there?
We have one more lecture, Dr.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Professor Dr. Now I would like to invite Professor Dr. Tilakavati. Sorry, sorry for her presentation.
Thank you. And in the interest of time, I think I should just carry on. Okay. So a lot has been talked about, mentioned about malnutrition and how difficult it is to get diet records or assess patients. But here I want to end up this afternoon session to explain the beauty of listening to patients and recording dietary information, because there's a lot that we can share as dietitians, and I'm sure clinicians are going to be surprised by what we learn. Now, you heard from my previous colleagues, they stressed that malnutrition is a major problem in the CKD population, and you heard Sharmila and Prof. Khosla talk about malnutrition and protein energy wasting in the hemodialysis population. But at the the core aspect that we should actually look at is also, when we talk about interventions for malnutrition, the aspect that we need to stress here is that the poor, inadequate dietary intake of our patients. Of course, from the research point of view, we are very fond of saying patients are underreporting. But on a case-by-case basis, when we see patients and we talk to them, an assessment of their records should be performed, because there's a lot of information that we need to dig out, because most of us are led by checking whether patients are adhering to clinical practice guidelines for protein and energy recommendations or not, and we say if they fail to achieve your dietary energy intake or dietary protein intake below a certain level, we declare that that diet is insufficient. Now, there are many factors that are responsible for poor dietary intake in dialysis patients, as you see here: anorexia, dietary restrictions, depression, inability to prepare food, the problematical gut, for example. Now, apart from that, we have to stand apart and look at the patient and acknowledge where the patient is coming from. The previous speaker, Dr. Zulfitri, was talking about food practices of patients during a festive period. And actually, the background of the patient indicates the kind of food they take. For example, religion is a major influence. Food traditions, whether they are vegetarian or non-vegetarian, especially in South Asia. Ethnicity in Malaysia, for instance, we find that vegetable consumption patterns are different amongst the different race groups. The kind of food preparation varies, the seasonings used, festival foods, culture, religion. These are all influences on patient food choices. Now, Malaysia, this is an example of Malaysia. It's a food environment friendly place. There's no lack for food availability of foods on the street, as you see here. Food is cheap, and I'm sure it's the same scenario here in Dhaka or in the rest of Bangladesh. And for Malaysia, and for instance, most people begin their breakfast outside. It's a typical food habit, as you see here. And the same thing goes for our patients. It's expected most patients pick up their meals when they come in for dialysis. Most of the meals are bought out on the street before they bring it in for their dialysis session, as you see here. Now, the aspects that we are concerned about for their food choices are: one, the high salt intake, meals consumed outside, food purchased at hawker centers, fast food places, restaurants, always. Preferably, if they're not high in salt, they'll be bland to taste. At home, most meals use high salt flavoring agents. And then there are also cultural food practices with peculiar salt-rich items. For the Chinese, for instance, they're very fond of salted vegetables. Indians with their papads and pickles. Malays with fermented fish sauces, etc. Another aspect in dialysis population that we never acknowledge is we see a very poor intake of fruit and vegetables. I know that the general thinking is that dialysis patients should cut back on fruit and vegetables to control their potassium, etc. But what I want to share with you is to open the audience, this listening audience, eyes to the fact that this may not actually be relevant. Here, this little box, as I'm showing here, shows you the typical fruit and veggie servings of a healthy population here, a PD population, and a hemodialysis population. And you can see that compared to the country's recommended nutrient intakes, both the dialysis, the hemodialysis and PD populations are under-consuming compared to normal healthy population. So the intake of fruit and vegetables is very low. And what we see when we talk with our patients is they tend to drop these two items out to make their meals affordable. Now, one aspect that we need to note in patients' diet is diet monotony. It's defined as a tendency to choose the same meal over and over and over again. And what you see here is a chicken rice meal. And when I first started working with renal patients, this is at the National Kidney Foundation Dialysis Center. This the first unit that they opened in the 1990s. And one of these patients, we used to go in every day, and we used to send in students, and this patient will repeat the same meal for breakfast, lunch, dinner 7 days a week. So I went back to talk to him, and he said, this is something that is easy for him. He doesn't have to depend on his family to cook a special meal for him, and it's easy just to pick it up on the doorstep of the dialysis hospital. Now, this is an example of a monotonous meal. Now, diet monotony is now measured. It's been shown to correlate to poor nutritional intake in dialysis patients, and it's been shown that a 5-point increase in the monotony index usually tallies with a drop of 10 kilocalories per kilogram body weight, and as well as a drop about 0.4 grams of protein intake in these patients. Now, when we look at the tertiles of when we compare patients with a varied, balanced diet compared to a monotonous diet, the energy sufficiency is easily achieved by those consuming a balanced diet with energy and protein compared to those who are sticking to the one tried and tested meal here as shown. Now, food reactants is another aspect of behavior that we notice. Patients in season love to choose a forbidden food. And I think it's normal across for everybody. When you place restrictions on food, sex, or spending money, then a person will always want the most forbidden thing. And it's the same thing with our patient. And this always explains food non-compliance. In Malaysia, for instance, a beloved fruit becomes toxic to our dialysis population when durians are in season, as you see here. And we see our patients having spikes in blood potassium levels during the durian season. Do you have durians here in Bangladesh? No, okay. Now, let me explain what patients are telling us. With the patch study, as Prof. Kozla was talking about, he elaborated it. We had opportunity to build up, collect dietary records, train our enumerators to collect data correctly, and we went through we were not just interested in looking at single nutrients or anything, because this is the first thing that dietitians look at, the adequacy of calorie and protein, and whether diets are conforming to guidelines. But we were looking out to look at whether patients with a lower phosphate intake, did it correlate with lower protein intake? Did a lower potassium intake mean that they were not consuming a heart-friendly diet? We were looking out for whether these dietary patterns were monotonous or not, and did they relate to lower calories and lower protein intake? We were looking at adherence and non-compliancy aspects. So why are we looking at it beyond nutrients alone? Because we wanted to look at information that captured food behaviors that is more logical, which is influenced by social behavior and cultural factors. So we wanted to understand the complex nature of these food choices in relation to their clinical picture. We wanted to pick out dietary factors that were relating to poor nutritional status. It's very important. And what we wanted to do with the output from this kind of work is to formulate new guidelines for our patients. So this is what we did. We looked at dietary records of Malays, Chinese, Indians. We examined it in terms of looking at food behaviors. Our objectives was to develop dietary pattern analysis and look at associations between dietary patterns and factors that influence their nutritional status. This is the data came from the cross-sectional screening of patch, as you see here. we had an excess of we had access to about 380 patient records. If you look at the breadth of data that we can link from dietary across to the nutritional and metabolic biomarkers. Now, dietary pattern analysis is detailed. It requires back-breaking work, but it allows building up a food database, as you see here. Now, in short, what did it lead to? Well, we used principal component analysis and identified 4 major eating patterns. Home food, yes. Patients, we found that home food was one of the behavior patterns. An eating out pattern, which is rice dominated. Another eating out pattern, which is dominated by sugar sweetened beverages. And another one, eating out with just noodles. So this is an image of what it looks like. I'm afraid you can't see it. The name of these patterns is named by the largest factor. So you will see over here the home food. It's got all the food groups, protein foods, vegetables, fruits, meat, eggs, along with cereals. Eating out, you'll see some of these, the beneficial foods been dropped out, as you see here. Looking at sugar-sweetened beverage here, the pattern changes. This becomes the largest factor, the sugar-sweetened beverages, patients taking a lot of these drinks. And eating out pattern here, the noodles, a lot were basically instant noodles. Patients bring in instant noodles, Maggi mee to the dialysis centers, and that's what they're consuming. So what is the impact of these dietary patterns? Just to guide you here, this is the HF is the home pattern. Eating out the rice diet, sugar-sweetened beverage diet, the noodle diet. And looking at age, gender, ethnicity, generally younger patients preferred to eat out. The choice was either rice or sugar-sweetened beverage. Men were more likely to consume the eating out rice diet or the eating out sugar-sweetened beverage pattern. And these 2 patterns were consumed commonly by Malays, whereas the eating out noodle pattern was consumed by Chinese. Then when we looked at working status, we found that most dialysis patients who were working were the ones who are more likely to consume the eating out diet with rice or the sugar-sweetened beverage. When we looked at eating out frequency, this is all, of course, associated. It is the highest with the rice, sugar-sweetened beverage, as well as the noodle diet. So obviously, the eating out frequency was least with the home diet, as you see here. Okay. Now coming to associations with nutritional adequacy, looking at total calories. This is looking at total calories. This one, dietary energy intake, calories per kilogram body weight, carbs, potassium. So if you look at here, for calories, energy adequacy was achieved when patients were easily taking the eating out. These were refined meals, very high in calories, rice and the sugar-sweetened beverage pattern. When looked at adequacy in terms of body weight, you can see both fill that very nicely. So patients who are eating out, taking a lot of sugar-sweetened beverage and a lot of rice were able to achieve their dietary energy adequacy. Carbohydrate intake was highest coming from the sugar-sweetened beverage diet, as probably sugars contributing a lot to these calories. And for potassium, we saw that the highest consumption of dietary potassium was seen with the home food pattern, because that's where the consumption of fruit and vegetables was coming. Now sodium, we see here right at the top, a higher sodium intake was associated with those eating outside on the rice diet and the noodle pattern. The right at the top, the noodle, extreme right as I'm showing here, the noodle pattern. Phosphate, we see a trend of that the home food and the eating out rice patterns showed very high dietary phosphate intake because they had higher intake of animal foods. Fluid pattern, we found that the home food pattern and the sugar-sweetened beverage pattern spiked for a high fluid intake. So the total volume of fluids went up most intensively with the highest level of consumption. Then we looked at diet monotony index. Well, we saw that the home pattern was the least monotonous, as you see here. There's a downward trend, whereas the noodle diet was the opposite. It carried the highest monotony index. Now, next we connected to nutritional parameter, the hand grip strength as shown here. The hand grip strength was the strongest with those in the home diet. The highest, the T3 group, had the highest hand grip strength as shown here. Serum albumin levels were significantly the highest with those conforming to the home food pattern, whereas it was not significant across for the others. Serum phosphate levels increased significantly only with the highest level of sugar-sweetened beverage consumption, as you see here. Please take note, I'll come back to this later. Malnutrition inflammation score was the lowest associated with the home food pattern. Now, let me now switch track and focus on just phosphorus. Now, the ideal phosphorus to protein ratio is an important target that we have to manage for patients, and it's acknowledged that all protein-rich foods carry phosphorus, as you see here. So the P2P, the phosphorus to protein ratio, is used looking at the phosphorus to protein division, as you see here, the protein, and the final point, you can see egg white has got the lowest P2P ratio. Ideally, the favorable P2P ratio should be below 12 milligrams per gram. A patient who's consuming a lot of egg whites will improve with serum albumin levels as shown here. The blue represents serum phosphates coming down.
Honorable Speaker has 2 minutes remaining.
Up. So what's the meaning of, aside from that, the other factor that we look at is the nature of dietary phosphorus. So we need to identify whether the phosphorus is coming from plants, animals, or food additives. Generally, phosphorus sources from plants and animals are considered organic, and there's a limitation to their absorption as shown here. Whereas food additives are what we call industrial additives, are highly absorbent, they're inorganic, and the absorption in the gut is all more than 80%. I won't go into why it's that, but common phosphate additives are aspect. Going back to our data, again the home food, eating out, sugar-sweetened beverage and noodles, looking at plant organic phosphates, animal organic phosphates, inorganic phosphates, and P2P ratio. Now, the animal phosphate intake, if you look at it, was the highest on the home food, shown here. From T1 to T3, it increases there directly. And inorganic phosphate, sorry, I need to push that out. And inorganic phosphate is instead reverse for the home food. If you see here, it's the lowest, the inorganic phosphate level, because patients are not eating out. Yet, when you look at the aspect, eating out, the inorganic phosphate increases on the rice diet as shown here, and highly significant when it comes to the sugar-sweetened beverages. If you see here from 80, the minimum, it almost doubles by the time it comes to an intense consumption of this kind of diet. Okay, the P2P ratio is highest with the sugar-sweetened beverage diet and the lowest with the monotonous diet, because these people are not consuming anything beyond that one meal. So what does this mean? What we see here is that the sugar-sweetened beverage group had the highest serum phosphate levels, as you see here. From 1.74, the highest intake comes to 1.9, and the adjusted risk ratio for hypophosphatemia is only associated with the sugar-sweetened beverage diet. It goes up by 53%. Where does this come from? The inorganic phosphates are coming from these kind of beverages, which we extracted from patient
Honorable
records.
Speaker, your time
These are the
has
kind
now
of
ended.
industrial phosphates in these drinks. So, to summarize, we just say that patient food records tell us a lot, and it appears that younger patients, men, the Malay race, the Malay patients and those who are working are more likely to be eating out, and the Chinese patients have a tendency to consume the monotonous noodle diet. The home food pattern was seen to be the best in terms of
Honorable
nutritional
Speaker,
status,
your time is over
improved
now.
hand grip strength, and serum albumin levels. So I won't go beyond, I won't repeat what I showed you for phosphate levels. So in conclusion, we want to say that we need to examine our patients, and we need to look at promoting home eating and pushing for balanced dietary meal patterns for the patients. And where patients are consuming, it's different across South Asian countries. You need to look at where the sources of inorganic phosphates are coming from. Thank you. What is the use of this generate data? We've already started producing this kind of patient education material to look at updating in terms of organic and inorganic phosphates. We have now moved towards mobile app to put in this information for doctors to adjust their phosphate binder dose. Thank you. This kind of information is not possible if we don't have a big team of dietitians, as you can see the file room. And finally, I'd like you all to, there's an advertisement for the next year's meeting at Guangzhou, China, for the Renal Nutrition and Metabolism meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm just going to request the chairperson to just limit the question time. Two of our speakers have to go to the airport to catch their flight. So we've run a bit late into the session today. So if you could just restrict the question-answer session to 2 minutes, please. Thank you.
Dear audience, thank you for your kind patience. And I would like to thank Professor Dr. Tilakavati for her very interesting and informative presentation. You have heard already that we have time constraint. So, dear audience, if you have question, please limit your question and don't elaborate your question. Just short question can be invited. Maybe 2 questions per paper. Sir, is it okay? Okay, thank you. Now, you can ask your question. Sir, sure.
You have shown that 25% patient of KidneyFoundation has malnutrition. Did you have a control study of the family of the patient who have kidney failure and to see whether the family also has the similar type of malnutrition or not?
No, that's a good point. No, unfortunately we don't, because this is related to patch. But even the 25%, I think, is an underestimate. I would suspect that it's also there in the family. I mean, that's just a suspicion, no data, but...
Is there any question? I think you have scared to ask question, but we have maybe 10 to 15 minutes? More? How many? Okay, we have 5 minutes more. If you want to ask any question, then you can ask the question. Is there anybody? Okay. This is our last question, but we can take.
Is there any role for protein granules given on the day of dialysis, or Nendril or some steroids which the bodybuilders use to help them make their muscle? So is there any role to use those forbidden things for normal people? We can use those forbidden drugs or medicine for our dialysis patients when there is malnutrition.
Actually, I think you are better at answering this. We certainly can't, based on the practices I know. Go ahead.
The aspect of whether protein energy wasting is treatable or not is still to be evaluated. We are actually, the cohorts from our group have already gone in for oral nutrition supplementation, and some of them have even they've been looking at IDPN. We find, maybe Sharmila, would you share what it is like? But we were looking at protein powders. 2 years back, we were looking at protein, ice whey protein supplementation for PD patients. Sharmila, you can share. That was her master's project, but I feel she should answer that. I don't want to answer that. What is your impact? Because we did exactly what you're saying theoretically. We used bodybuilders' protein, but we got them to provide as sachets because we wanted to control. But Sharmila, please answer why, what was the outcome of that?
So with these patients, we did see improvements in their energy and protein intake, even in the malnutrition inflammation score. And when we further break them down into patients who were compliant to the product, because we do see compliance being an issue, in these patients we saw changes in anthropometry measures, body weight, BMI, even in the serum albumin levels. So, I mean, the type of protein powder that's being used does make a difference, especially with whey protein.
But we also because we use that as an example to see theoretically what happens. Yes, we see that the NPCR improvement is tremendous, but there's still calorie insufficiency. As long as you do not fulfill the calorie sufficiency rule, gluconeogenesis is still going to take place. So giving protein alone is not enough. On average, dilute calories are roughly about 200 calories, and our nephrologists say that's only the maximum they will give because of various reasons. So our patients, calorie sufficiency is still critical. Achieving protein sufficiency is not a problem, but you need to fulfill the caloric sufficiency.
For us, it's the other way around. Yes. We can give them one chocolate bar and they're sorted.
But you mentioned body size. So for Asians, it's different.
Thank you very much.
Steroids. You didn't answer the steroids.
We have not explored steroids yet.
But we have tried it in our patients, particularly in male patients, trying Nedrol in very, very severely malnourished people. And in few cases, we have seen some responses.
It's expected because Sharmila was talking about muscle metabolism. It's actually something that should be done, but it's not something that we dietitians can do. But we believe that this is an intervention, a trial that should be examined with a nephrologist keen to come in to look at this, the use of steroids.
So Sakib, another trial.
Yeah, we can, if you're willing to join us.
Thank you very much. I'll just ask the chairperson to conclude the session by distributing the certificates to our speaker. Thank you.
Okay, session is closed. You want me to give the certificate to myself? Let's start with Sharmila. I think with that, it's over because we have a plane to catch.
Thank you very much. I'm really sorry. We've run a little bit late into our last session. But it was a great pleasure to have all of you over here, our international speakers. In fact, it's a great honor for me to host this event because Professor Magdi Yaqub visited us for the first time after I've joined work here. The first time he came, I was his registrar, and this time I'm Professor Haruna Rashid, assistant professor. So it's a great pleasure for me to host this event. And it's a great honor to work with both of them. I think the take-home message from this conference for me was, if you want to learn, you have to get involved. So lots of research. We want to start in KidneyFoundation, and I'm sure both of you will be encouraging us and be behind our back. Thank you very much.
The last part, I like to thank all the speakers, the participants, the chairpersons who has come all over the country, and particularly I thanks the Royal London Hospital, the Wayne State University Hospital, and the delegates from the Malaysia who has come a long way to spread their knowledge and different aspects of the high technology in medicine, dialysis, transplantation, and above all, the dietary modification of this group of patients. So it is immense pleasure for me, for KidneyFoundation, as well as for the doctors who has participated in these 2 days for this scientific seminar. There is no doubt that if these types of conference continue, then the knowledge and expertise of the doctors, nurses, paramedics of our KidneyFoundation will improve, and thereby will spread this knowledge to other people as well. And thank you very much to come over here. Thanks.